Shalom, shalom, friends. Shalom, shalom. Thank you for being here. Sorry for the delay in getting started. We want to jump right in here. Session 4 of 5. I feel us going deeper and deeper in our content together. That is both personal and scholarly and historical and of this moment. Self and mystical identity in 16th century Kabbalah. As always, you can write questions or thoughts in the chat, or you can wait towards the conversation towards the end. And Alex will just put Professor Fishbane's in the bio in the chat again, even though you know his background, just in case you want a refresher, and especially a refresher on his books, which you may want to check out. And with that, Professor Fishbane, thank you for being back for session 4 of 5.
Thank you, Rav Shmuley, and great to see everybody again. And as we journey into the meaning of the self in Jewish mysticism. Last time, if you recall, when we last met our hero, we encountered the thought of Moshe Cordovero in Tomer Devora on the theme of love, compassion, empathy, of the Yud Gimel Midot Harachamim in Keter, the 13 attributes of compassion as they flow into the lower Sfirot, and as ourselves, as our individual personal identity is formed as Tselem Elohim, as the image of God, in the sense of actions, character traits, and he encourages us to meet everyone with the shining face of compassion, the shining face of love and soothing, and to first bring that to consciousness in ourselves, right? If we recall, there is first that moment of hamtakat hadinim, of the sweetening of the judgmental forces, or what that also means in the history of Kabbalah is the sweetening or the softening of the demonic forces, because they did live in medieval and early modern times, of course. And I thought that today, before we turn further into this theme, and then also to see how this plays out in both traditions attributed to Isaac Luria, the Ari, and also that of the Shla, the Shnei Luchot Abrit of Isaiah Horowitz, to approach the text from the Tomer Devora piece of your forehead should not be tense at all, but should resemble the forehead of the will, through the lens of some spiritual practice, to get us oriented toward this, also in a meditative awareness type of way. So just to recall the text as he articulates it, and then maybe we'll try it for a moment with some deep breaths and some relaxing of our own foreheads, and see how that affects our own emotions, right? Because part of this is a kind of confluence of both last session and this session, a confluence of prescription and ideals of moral practice and piety, and the description and prescription of emotions and sensation and feeling states, and how that relates to the nature of selfhood, right? That's to say, what is the role of, right? There are all these different dimensions that we're exploring, and they will also eventually be chapters or subchapters of the eventual book that years down the line. But part of that is also part of what makes us human, part of what defines personal identity is the nature of feeling and emotion and the relationship of emotion to mind. Right there, I mentioned last time also how significant that connection is for in the thought of Martha Nussbaum, in her both in her upheavals of thought, the intelligence of emotions. In other words, what's the relationship between emotion, specifically empathy and compassion and love, to moral judgment and virtue, and also in her a shorter but also very important book. Also, actually, I mean, shorter is relative because Upheavals of Thought is about 800 pages, and this was right. It's called Political Emotions: Why Love Matters for Justice. I mentioned that last time as well. So part of our question here is also, what is the relationship between becoming conscious of our emotions or cultivating certain states of emotion and feeling and the mind in how we make certain types of ethical decisions in the context here of also of mystical piety and the emulation of the divine and realization of Tzelem Elohim, the image of God. Right. So this bottom of page 84 from the Essential Kabbalah in the PDF of Cordovero Tomer Devora on Love and Compassion, your forehead, your metzach, should not be tense at all, but rather always resemble the forehead of the will with a capital W, meaning the ratzon, keter, which is the first sphera, is often referred to as ratzon, also in the Kabbalistic sources, so that you soothe everyone, right? And this seems to be both, right, a moment of self care to a certain extent, right? A moment of calming down our own selves, right? This moment of self compassion, self soothing, right? And even giving ourselves a little love, a little nurturance. And here I'm also thinking, I think I mentioned last time of the techniques articulated by Tara Brach in her book Radical Acceptance and Radical Compassion, which adapts various Buddhist teachings about ultimately culminating in she has an acronym that she calls RAIN: recognize, allow, investigate, nurture, and the last is kind of a nurturing, right, sort of being able to say, I feel this difficult feeling at this moment, let's say in this case anger, and to be able to soothe oneself and to be able to say that it's okay and to be present in that emotion. And we talked also last time about how this source of the purest compassion of the Yud Gimel Midot HaRachamim, of the 13 attributes of compassion, can flow down in God into all of the different sefirot, the different dimensions of divinity, including din slash gevura, right? The left side of the sefirot, that is to say, the force of severity, of judgment, of harshness, right, which is sometimes necessary. But we spoke about last time, how can we do that with the grounding of empathy and compassion? And we talked about how that might mean not allowing ourselves to lose our humanity, to lose our ability to be centered ultimately in a human oriented rachamim. Right? He says, even if you come across angry people, soothe and calm them with your good will. And of course, it's not always possible. For the forehead of the will constantly accepts and soothes the harsh powers, reintegrating them, as we talked about before, right? How do we take in those feelings of harshness or of rage or of anger and soothe them in these tranquil waters of rachamim we mentioned last time. So what I'd like us to try for a few moments is to start with briefly with a breathing technique derived from pranayama yoga of 4-7-8. That is to say, a 4-count inhale, 7-count hold, and an 8-count exhale through the mouth with pursed lips. Of course, this is all dependent on how you feel individually, physically, right? So don't do anything that you're not comfortable with, or modify it as necessary. But to let us imagine, perhaps to give it a little bit of a further Jewish twist, we might imagine the inhale of the 4 through ideally through the nose, through the nostrils, as the inhalation of the 4 worlds of becoming, of the in Kabbalah, of Atzilut, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, easily remembered by the acronym ABIYA, emanation, creation, formation, and making, moving from abstraction to concreteness, moving from the most transcendent to the most immanent. The 7, right after you inhale deeply, taking in that breath of creative life. If the 4 represents divine creating and creation, it's also human becoming and world life force. So inhaling that divine life force, and then letting it sit in you and spread out in you, like the 7 days of the week, right? To a count of 7, culminating in an inner Shabbat, if you will. And then as we exhale to the count of 8, since we're just about to come to Hanukkah, let's imagine that exhale of 8 as like the 8 lights, the 8 days, the 8 moments of illumination, the reminder of the miracle of life and miracles in our world, and that exhalation, at least as I've learned it, and this is more of the supplemental amateur side of what I have to offer you, but hopefully we can integrate it. Is that the exhalation calms the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So it's also a moment of that calming down. So as we exhale, we're also imagining the moment of releasing that tension, right? So because we're going to connect this afterwards to the relaxing of the forehead that we see in Cordovero. So let's start by practicing the breathing for just a few moments. And first I'll count for you, and then I will join you. So sit yourself in a comfortable position. Close your eyes if you wish, or not. You could open your palms upward, resting them on your lap or wherever, as a gesture of tefillah, of prayer, of supplication. And we're first going to inhale in through through the nose if possible. So in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And now I'll join you in, and keep the breathing cycle going. And as you do it, imagine that the life force of divinity is flowing through you from Keter, the source of all life breath and compassion and rachamim, and it's held inside you, spreading out like the 7 days of the week into Shabbat, and flowing out of you as the miracle of life. And now, in keeping, as you continue to breathe in that rhythm, where you could also shift to just inhaling to 4 and exhaling to 7, exhaling to 8. Bring your mind to your forehead, like Cordovero advises us, and imagine it relaxing, all of the tension in your forehead relaxing and releasing all of the dinin, all of the tensions and judgments that we carry in our lives toward others, toward ourselves, releasing the tension of anger or harshness or severity, and just tuning in to rachamim, to compassion, just like metzach haratzon shel haketer, just like the forehead of the will of Keter that contains the Yud Gimel Midot HaRachamim. And send that Rachamim into your own heart first, and feel it in your own relaxed forehead, that you not be filled, that I not be filled with anger and judgment toward others, but rather that I be filled with empathy and the ability to love and soothe my fellow human being. Feel that the light of Keter flowing through your calmed forehead. Cordovero says, should take in those harsh powers, those dinin, reintegrating them, calming them, soothing them. And so, like God does that, so should you soothe as one who is created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. So should you soothe those overwhelmed by anger, induce them with your goodwill, drawing on great wisdom to extinguish their anger before it transgresses the boundary and causes damage. God forbid. Model yourself on the will. Model yourself on Keter, on that state of calm and compassion and love, which emanates from the wondrous wisdom in the forehead of the Ancient One, of the Atik, of the Atika, which is the transcendent another name for the transcendent dimension of Keter, Atik Yomin, from where it soothes everything. And derived from that, Cordovero says, the power to be genial and kind to others. Because if your character is somewhat harsh, people will not be soothed. And he also talks about other elements of sensation, right? You should tune your ears to hear the good and not let in the rumors and the gossip of lashon hara, rechilut. According to the secret of sublime listening, which is quite striking. According to the secret of sublime listening, right? That we attune ourselves to be able to listen for kindness and good and not let in the lashon hara, the rumors and the gossip and the judgmental talk. And he says there no harsh shouting enters, no tongue of evil, no lashon hara leaves a blemish. Listen only to positive, useful things, not to things that provoke anger. Right. So how this could almost be a version of Kabbalistic meditation and cognitive behavioral therapy. Right. To focus in on the positive, useful, practical takeaways of these moments and not the things that will provoke anger. And so too with another element of your sensation, if we're talking about emotion and sensation and how it relates to the mind, contemplation and mindfulness, you should be aware of your sight, of your eyes, and don't gaze at anything disgraceful, but you should always be open to notice those who suffer. Always be open to notice, to see those who suffer, and to be compassionate toward them as much as possible. And when you see a poor person suffering, do not close your eyes in the slightest, right? So here's where emotion and sensation and moral decision making emerge, right? As hard as this is, right? And I know that this is such a central feature of the work that Rav Shmuley does, Valley Beit Midrash does, in its broader sense and its practical work. Right? Keep your eyes open, keep your gaze attuned to those who are suffering, those who need you. It says in the Zohar that an ideal righteous person sees someone suffering, someone homeless, someone hungry, someone in pain, and is ashkacha be, right? That you are able to gaze, you're able to look directly at the suffering, and therefore both to humanize the person in the moment of encounter, and also to not hide ourselves from that suffering, right? Which is easier said than done, right? When we're walking down the city street or whatever street it might be, and that might be a constant, or that might be something frequent, right? How will I look into the face of the person suffering and take that as an imperative, like Levinas says, and we'll see this also a little in a moment, that see the vulnerability of the other as the face of God shining through to you. And your face should always be shining. Welcome each person with a friendly countenance, right? We can never underestimate the power of of a smile, of a face of kindness and softness toward another person, and not harshness, and shining a kind of blessing light, right, as opposed to the redness and harsh judgment, so that whoever looks at you will find only joy and friendly expression, right? Of course, these are aspirational. These are intentions. These are kavanot. Just like they are kavanot also with prayer, right? Can we always be centered and focused upon God? Can we always fulfill these hard ideals? But even seeing it as aspirational and intentional is deeply significant, because it moves us to ground our ethical practice here also in a very devotional, mystical Tselem Elohim practice. And again, with sensation, all of these are embodied sensations, right? Bringing our mind to our forehead, bringing our mind to our eyes and our ears and our speech and how we hold ourselves. Your mouth should produce nothing but good. The words you speak should be Torah and an expression of goodwill. Never generate angry or ugly words, curses, or nonsense. Right? Good luck to all of us in that. But it's also aspirational, right? So maybe when we forgive ourselves for being human and falling into some of that sometimes, that this can be a recalibration to try to realign ourselves, right? And in this sense, like an emulation of the divine, let your mouth resemble the upper mouth of divinity, right? This is kind of an anthropic, superhuman like vision of divinity, or as I think I said last time, also it's also very much theomorphic, right? We are form manifestations of divinity. So of course we have a mouth that speaks, and ears that hear, and eyes that see, and a forehead that needs calming, and they are, let's at least say, symbolic or metonymic, representative of that upper mystery of divinity. Speak positively, always with benevolent words, right? So these are deeply challenging aspirations, but the question is, how can we realize our createdness b'Tselem Elohim, which Cordovero says is not simply about literal isomorphism, right? Parallel forms above and below, but it's about how do we take that idea of the upper form, almost in a Platonic, Plato-like sense of the ideal form, and manifest it in our actions below, so that we bring our attention to a loving, calming releasing of tension, and absorbing and calming in the tranquil waters of our furrowed brow, like the Metzach Ha'elyon, like the forehead of Keter above, to calm the Dini, to calm the judgments, to calm the severity, right, which we all need in these days and in all days. And that's what it is to try to be like God in a moral, mystical sense, according to Cordovero. And that is true. That is true also for all the ways in which we become conscious of our different sensations, right? How do we see, right, that we should both not look at, let's say, the disgrace of, or the shame of others, but but keep our eyes open to the suffering that is before us, in a sense of the way in which it calls us as a moral imperative, that itself is also a mystical devotional moment where I'm realizing I'm realizing God on earth, as it were, in my actions, and aware of what I hear, right? Do I let in the slander or the lashon hara or the gossip or the judge, or even if it's true, the judgments, the harsh things about other people, or do I try to listen for the good, and do I try to speak the good? So with that in mind, I'd like us to turn to this imperative of love in the text that I believe was distributed last time also, the one from Lurianic Practices of Sapphic Spirituality, right? You got that one from the Fine. That's and let's go down to the first. You have here this introduction about Isaac Luria, if you want to, and his practices and his circle, if you want to fill in a little bit of the background of your knowledge outside of our time together, so that might help you. And it's a wonderful volume in general, Sapphic Spirituality, part of the Classics of Western Spirituality series, and kind of interfaith ecumenical series of many translations of spiritual mystical works from different faiths. And there are a number of different pieces here in the ethical and pietistic customs of Isaac Luria, but I want us to, along the lines of what we were just talking about, to turn to the paragraph that's marked number 5, which is on page 7 of the PDF, page 66 of Sapphic Spirituality. And maybe we can have a volunteer to read the first paragraph, and then starting with before an individual begins to pray in the synagogue, and then we can have another volunteer to read the second one. So who would like to read the first paragraph that includes nothing less than V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha from Vayikra Yud Tet, from Leviticus 19:18.
Before an individual begins to pray in the synagogue, he must take upon himself the precept, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yes, and this is, so these are teachings that Chaim Vital is transmitting in the name of his teacher Isaac Luria. Right, Luria himself wrote very little. But these are teachings that he heard him transmit. So it's important to note, before a person begins to pray in the synagogue, right? So this is going to be in the communal context. One needs to take upon oneself the mitzvat aseh, the positive commandment, right? Precept is almost I want to say it a little bit more strongly, right? It's to take upon oneself the mitzvah aseh, the imperative, the positive commandment of v'ahavta l're'echa kamocha before you pray, and he should concentrate, or one should concentrate.
And he should concentrate upon loving every member of the house of Israel as he loves himself, on account of which his prayer will ascend, bound up with all the prayers of Israel. By this means his soul will be able to rise above and effect tikkun.
which means a kind of Kabbalistic repair of the upper realms of divinity. And though it's clear what Luria meant here himself, right, in terms of talking about Ahavat Yisrael, of a kind of inner Jewish community intention. I myself would like to see this as a broader imperative regarding one's fellow human being, right? Um, and this notion of the Haftarech Kamocha, of, right, you shall love your fellow, your neighbor, or your fellow person, your friend, as you love yourself. Does that mean as much as you love yourself? And that means that self-love and egoism is there's an awareness that maybe it's because of our survival instinct, right? That there is an element of self-love, or of the ability to love oneself, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, right? But the idea is to have that love and compassion for others, as much as we see this in ourselves, right? And that should happen before one begins to pray. And on account of that act of taking upon that mitzvah of ve'ahavta, right? The commandment, the imperative to love, which and in a text that we likely won't necessarily get to today. Isaiah Horowitz, a slightly later thinker who integrates a lot of different elements of previous Tzfat thinkers, talks about v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, of you shall love your neighbor, your fellow human being as yourself, as much as yourself, right? In a kind of mutuality. And ve'ahavta, in that imperative commanded sense, as one love with the love of God. It's the same thing as ve'ahavta Adonai Elohecha that we find in the Shema, that you shall love the Lord your God. Right? He says there that the two of them are joined together as one love, and when you perform one of those loves, you are also performing the other, right? Which both Buber and Levinas, two early 20th century thinkers, say that when we engage in that encounter with the face of the other, and heed the moral imperative and commandment to love the other, and that we are also encountering the very face of God, and that will enable one to pray authentically, right? It's on account of that one's prayer will ascend, because there was a notion in both earlier Jewish mysticism from the time of the rabbis, of the ancient rabbis, and then also here, that the prayers of Israel ascend to the divine realm. And in the Chazal context, in the ancient sages context, there is the angel Metatron, who is Metatron in Greek, right? He's before the throne. He weaves all those prayers into a kind of garland crown, like the Greeks used to wear, that is placed upon the head of God. Those are the prayers of Israel. But here, right, it's that the prayers will ascend above. They will right, as you speak them, they float up like this. Instead of the smoke of sacrifice, it's like the breath of our prayers and our speech that ascend above, and that are bound together with the other prayers of Israel, and the other prayers of the people with whom we are praying, and if we broaden this, the other prayers of all people. And by this means, person's soul will be able to rise above and affect tikkun, like tikkun olam, be able to affect a kind of repair and harmony and restoration of the divine. David, I think you had a question or comment about this particular piece before we go to the next paragraph, right?
Yes, thank you. I don't know whether this is purposeful or not, but we've got the words from Torah, and then let's see, then Fine seems to restate them slightly differently underneath. So first we say, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself from Torah. And then we say we should concentrate on loving every member of the house of Israel as he loves himself. Now, these are similar, but to me, they're not the same. Again, don't know whether that's purposeful or sloppy. But to me, when you love your neighbor as yourself, essentially, you are loving that same oneness that is your source, your essence, in your neighbor. So you're going back. You're going back from the diversity of life to the source that we all share, and we love the neighbor as thyself. We go back to the single self from which we all came. Then we say it differently. We love every member of the house of Israel as he loves himself. Now you're repeating duality. Okay, I love myself this way. I love the other person the way I love myself. And we've got a different message going on. They're similar, but they're not the same. Do you think fun is? Can you comment on whether the differences there are, from what you can gather, purposeful or maybe a little bit sloppy?
So I certainly wouldn't say sloppy. I would say that it's probably an attempt to be faithful to the particular Hebrew of the Vayikra verse, in contrast to how Chaim Vital articulated. I don't have the Vital Hebrew before me, but V'ahavta lecha kamocha could be translated in a number of different ways. I think, right? It could be as thyself, kamocha. It could be drawing back to that act of love of you should and certainly the way that verse was understood, let's say, in the school of Hillel, and then we see this also in, as I mentioned last time, in the Jesus movement in early Christianity, right, in the Sermon on the Mount, right, because the famous teaching of Hillel is building upon V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, and it's essentially to say, right, that which is hateful to you, do not do unto somebody else, right? Which is also what we hopefully teach our 4 and 5-year-olds, sometimes successfully, and we need to teach it to ourselves as well. And I think it's a bit of both. I think you're touching very, very nicely on both dimensions, right? On the one hand, going back to what we talked about last time about the idea that all of us, right, in the Kabbalistic theory of souls, or at least as I understand it, we are all derived from Adam Harishon in a metaphysical sense, right? We're all drawn from that light of that one original gargantuan body of light, and therefore we are all fellow members of the body, if you will, right? And actually, Luria via Vital is gonna say something about this that speaks to community and fellowship in the next paragraph that I think perhaps will actually help us clarify this or open this up. So maybe we can first get a second reader to read, and especially when it comes to, and then we can tie them together. Those are very, very important points. Would somebody like to pick up there, or I'm sure or David is welcome to continue, to whichever people would like. Great, thank you.
And especially when it comes to the love for one's associates who studied Torah with one another, each and every person must bind himself to the others as if he were one limb within the body of his fellowship. This is particularly important when an individual possesses the knowledge and mystical insight with which to understand and apprehend his friend's soul. And there should be one among them in distress. All must take it upon themselves to share his trouble, whether it has to do with some illness or with his children, God forbid. And they must pray on his behalf. Likewise, in all one's prayers and petitions, one should be mindful of his fellows. My teacher of blessed memory took great care to caution me about the love which we ought to bear toward our associates, the members of our brotherhood.
Right, so you can see from that last line, and thank you. We can see from that last line, right. This is Vital saying, my teacher, Isaac Luria of blessed memory, right, also showing when this was written after his death, took great care to caution me about the love we have to bear toward our associates, or really, it may actually be the chaverim, because they talked about in the Zohar, it's referred to as chevraya, as the chevraya in Aramaic, right? So the kind of sacred mystical fellowship, and the term chaver, chaverim, and chavura was used quite extensively in this 16th century literature, and actually Larry Lawrence Fine edited a book that I contributed to called Friendship in Jewish History and Culture and Thought, some version of that in Jewish history, some version of that title. My essay there is on God in the face of the other mystical friendship in the Zohar, and this idea. And this also relates, I think, to what you were saying, David, of each and every person must bind themselves to the others, let's say to the other spiritual friends of the fellowship, of that mystical chabura, as if he were one limb within the body of this fellowship, as if that person were one limb within the body of this fellowship, right? So we are the fellowship itself, the community itself, even if it's a micro community, a fraternity of sorts, a brotherhood, which was actually quite common in the history of spirituality, that you had brotherhoods of pietists, and in some cases sisterhoods, but that was a little bit less common, unfortunately, at least as far as we know. And certainly the Kabbalists spoke about this in terms of a kind of small group of fellow mystics and fellow spiritual seekers, who are bound up with one another's concerns, right? And their empathy is such that they feel the pain and the distress of someone else, and they pray on their behalf, or they share in their joy. And that's also what it means to say, but especially when it comes to the love of one's associates or chaverim or friends who study Torah with one another and who pray with one another, right? About the fellowship, and that's I think exactly what it means when it says that before one begins to pray with this fellowship, with this community, let's think about it more broadly, one should take upon oneself this imperative of V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, which could be, I think, explained in a number of ways, as you alluded to, David, right? And as I mentioned with regard to the Shla, the Shnei Luchot Habrit of Isaiah Horowitz in late 16th, early 17th century, that the love of one's fellow and the love of God are bound up one with the other, right? This wasn't first articulated in Les Mis, right? To see the face of another, to see God as see the face of another, see the face of God, right? It's the same idea, and that as Levinas says, the French Jewish philosopher, ethics is the spiritual optics. When I engage in moral posture, then there is this spiritual presence of God. God becomes present to me in the moment of my realization of the moral expression of that imperative to love the other. And that's why V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha and V'ahavta Adonai Elohecha are truly one love. And that's also why, as Vital says in the name of Luria here, that you first need to take upon yourself that imperative mitzvah, that mitzvah taseh of you shall love v'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, you shall love one's neighbor, one's fellow, as if they were yourself, or as much as you love yourself, or as yourself, right? In all those different dimensions, right? Because we are connected. It says as different limbs of the body of the fellowship. So any kind of concluding thoughts or questions or observations about those sources and ideas that people might be having?
No, thank you for that. And sloppy was not the right word to use. I think he was, and I retract that. I think he was just trying to bring the point across from a couple of different perspectives. There are two separate messages here. I think he slides over them without describing that they are slightly different, which would have added some depth. But essentially, I think he's saying the same thing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Beth.
In a way, the point that David just made is highlighting two different but complementary understandings of God. One is that God is immanent in all things, and the other is the idea that God is somehow separate from us and transcendent from us. And I would say, just speaking from my own davening experience, since we're talking about prayer here, when I daven, I'm not parsing the philosophy behind my words. I'm singing the words, and it's a felt experience and not I'm not trying to wrestle with the Hebrew with exactitude. And I'm not sure what point I'm trying to make here. I guess what I'm saying is I think having both and is eminently plausible and reasonable. And I guess that's what I wanted to communicate. Divinity.
Yeah, no, wonderful, and I think that it's right. I think that there are a lot of ways in which this is taken in different elements of the tradition, and bringing it back also to that teaching that comes from the school of Hillel, and then that became even more famous once Christianity became the Roman Empire, right? But it was certainly important in the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, who clearly was in the school of Hillel, and to some extent, right? What does it mean? It was well stated in the negative, right? It's that which is hateful to you, don't do to another person, or that which you would want, or that which feels loving to you, you should give to another person. Um, so I'm mindful of the time, and I'll turn it to Alex in just a second. I just want to say that next time, which I think is our last session, we're going to be looking at one last aspect of the self, a very intriguing one, which I actually just recently published an essay about, and we'll look at some sections on mystical autobiography in 16th century. That is to say, written documents about self-introspection, and how that also, as we're going to see, relates to articulation of feeling and emotion. And the passages that we're going to look at in particular are going to be from the famous Rabbi Yosef Karo, right, of Shulchan Aruch fame. But here, this was in his Magid Meisharim, his wild and trippy mystical diary, and maybe a piece from Cordovero. We'll see, but we'll be looking at kind of the life writing genre of right, sometimes called life writing, ego documents, autobiography. Is like so many different critical terms, but it's diaries, whatnot. Alex.
Thank you so much, Professor Fishbane. Thank you all for joining us again today, and we look forward to session 5 next week. Thanks very much. See you next week.